Imagine standing inside a medieval cathedral. The air is cool, light filters through coloured glass, and somewhere in the distance a single human voice begins to sing. There is no orchestra, no harmony, no applause, waiting at the end. Only a melodic line, shaped by breath and stone, carrying sacred words upward into vaulted space. From music like this, spare, devotional, almost austere, grew a tradition that would span more than 1,000 years. It would pass through monasteries and royal courts, through salons and opera houses, through revolutions and industrial cities. Its sound would expand from one voice to hundreds. Its purpose would shift with each century. What we now call classical music is not one style, and it is not confined to one era. It is a long evolving history, a record of how European culture understood order, beauty, emotion, and the individual's place in the world. Over time, music that once served the liturgy began to serve monarchs. Music written for courts slowly reached public audiences. And eventually, composers began writing works that seemed to speak less for institutions and more for themselves. How did that transformation happen? How did we move from unaccompanied chant to the symphonies of Beethoven, from sacred ritual to opera, from structured balance to the fractured harmonies of the 20th century? To answer that, we have to return to the beginning of the written tradition, to the Middle Ages, when music was inseparable from faith and nearly every note carried spiritual meaning. But before we step into that world, let me take a moment to welcome you. If you've been here before, I'm very glad you've returned. And if this is your first time listening to Orpheus's Lyre, thank you for spending your time here. If these stories deepen your listening, you can help them travel by leaving a comment, liking the video, sharing it with someone who might enjoy it, or subscribing to the channel. It genuinely helps more people discover these histories. Now let's step back nearly 1,000 years to a Europe shaped by faith, stone, and silence. For much of the early Middle Ages, music in Western Europe is shaped by the church. It lives in monasteries, in cathedrals, in the fixed rhythms of prayer and ritual. It is heard in Latin, shaped by the liturgy, and bound to a world in which worship orders time itself. Singing forms part of a larger inheritance, something received, preserved, and repeated across generations. The sound that comes to define this world is plainchant, often called Gregorian Chant. The name reflects a long-standing association with Pope Gregory I, whom later tradition credits with helping shape the chant of the Roman Church. Whatever the legend, this body of music takes form gradually over centuries. In the 8th and 9th centuries, that tradition gains new force under the Carolingians. These are the Frankish kings and emperors who rule much of Western Europe in the political world from which medieval France later emerges. As they seek greater unity across a vast realm, they also encourage greater uniformity in liturgical practice. A shared faith requires shared forms, and among those forms is sound. Chant books are gathered, organized, and carried across their realm. And the sound they help spread is striking in its restraint. A single melodic line sung in unison. No instruments underpin it as a matter of course. There is no steady pulse in the modern sense. The rhythm follows the Latin text, its stresses, its phrasing, its breath. The melodies move within modes that feel unfamiliar if your ear expects major and minor. In a stone building, that single line can seem to hang in the air, as if the architecture has learned to sing back. For a long time, it is hard to find individual fingerprints. Much of this music comes to us without names attached, because it belongs to communities more than to authors. Its power lies in continuity, the sense that what is sung today was sung yesterday and will be sung tomorrow, and that the act of singing binds the living to something older than themselves. And then, in Paris, the sound changes. It is the 12th century, and at Notre Dame in Paris, musicians begin to do something startlingly new. They take the old chant and place new voices above it. The names most closely tied to this breakthrough are Léonin and Pérotin, composers linked to what later scholars call the Notre Dame school. They matter because the change they help shape is no minor refinement. It opens a new dimension in Western music. This practice is often described under the broad term organum. The basic idea is simple to explain and striking to hear. The original chant stretches into long tones, slow as a procession. Above it, one voice moves, then two, then sometimes more, tracing lines that twist, converge, separate, and meet again. The ear begins to hear music in layers, rather than as a single line. A new possibility has opened, multiple independent melodies unfolding at once. This is not yet harmony in the later, fully developed sense. No one is thinking in chords yet, but the ear is learning to recognize combinations of sound, tension, sweetness, friction, release. Out of these overlapping voices, a new kind of order begins to emerge. Music has acquired depth, and there is no going back from that. By the 14th century, composers command rhythm with greater precision, helped by developments in notation that allow time to be measured and organized more clearly. A period later called the Ars Nova, the New Art, pushes these possibilities further. One name stands out: Guillaume de Machaut. He writes sacred music on a large scale, and he writes secular songs shaped by the world of courtly poetry. Unlike so much earlier medieval music, his work carries a strong sense of individual authorship, a particular mind, a particular hand. Across these centuries, something important has changed. Polyphony begins as an extension of chant, a way of enriching what is already sacred. Over time, it becomes a way of building. It teaches composers how to shape long spans of music, how to control density, how to pace unfolding structures, and how to make separate lines move together without losing their independence. The medieval world remains oriented toward heaven. Music continues to serve worship and ceremony. Yet the techniques taking shape here will outlast the world that created them. Picture a different Europe now. The great cathedrals still stand, and the liturgy still orders the year, but the world has begun to tilt. Cities grow wealthy, courts grow competitive, scholars pore over the writings of Greece and Rome, Cicero, Virgil, and increasingly Greek authors whose works are returning to Western Europe, reading them with an intensity that reshapes how educated people think about language, reason, and human nature. Painters learn to model flesh and light as though the human body were worthy of the same careful attention once reserved for saints. Music changes with it. As educated Europe grows more attentive to language, proportion, and persuasion, composers begin to refine polyphony in the same spirit. The dense layers inherited from the late medieval world do not disappear, but they become clearer, more balanced, and more responsive to the words they carry. At the center of this development is the flowering of vocal polyphony across the 15th and 16th centuries, shaped above all by composers from the regions we now group under the term Franco-Flemish. Their careers form a map of patronage, singers and composers moving between chapels and courts, between Burgundy, France, Italy, and the Holy Roman Empire, carrying styles across borders because music, like power, travels with the people who serve it. One name becomes almost emblematic of the Renaissance ideal: Josquin de Prez. His reputation is already extraordinary in his own lifetime, and it only grows after his death. The music itself explains why. In his hands, polyphony acquires an unusual clarity. Voices answer one another with balance and purpose, and sacred texts are shaped with a new sensitivity to meaning. Even when the texture is rich, the music can feel direct, poised, and deeply human. One of the great shifts of the Renaissance lies in the way composers begin to treat text. Words are no longer simply carried by the music, they begin to shape it. Meaning is painted in sound, not with the overt drama of later opera, but through subtler means, a sudden thinning of texture to let a crucial phrase land, an imitative entry that makes an idea feel as though it is passing from voice to voice, a cadence that settles with the firmness of a completed thought. At the same time, another change is gathering force. Music begins to travel more widely through print. In the early 16th century, printers develop more effective ways of producing polyphonic music, and published collections begin to circulate across Europe. Composers become known beyond the courts and chapels where they serve. Styles spread faster. Influence travels farther. Rivalries sharpen. The musical world grows larger and more connected. And then that world is broken open. In the early 16th century, the unity of the Western Church breaks apart in the Reformation, and Europe enters an age of religious division. Music is drawn into these changes because worship itself is being redefined. In many Protestant regions, especially in the Lutheran world, the congregation takes on a more active musical role. Chorales, sturdy vernacular hymns meant to be sung by the people, become central to worship. That does not bring elaborate church music to an end. Instead, it creates a new body of shared melodies that later composers can expand, decorate, and weave into far more intricate works. In Catholic Europe, Reform takes a different shape. The Counter-Reformation brings renewed concern for order, discipline, and clarity in worship, and with that comes greater pressure for sacred music that supports devotion without obscuring the words. Out of this landscape emerges another defining figure, Giovanni Pierluigi da Palestrina, associated above all with Rome. Palestrina's name has long been tied to a familiar story that he saved polyphony at the Council of Trent. The truth is more complicated. The council did not hand down a single simple rule book for music, and the reforms of Catholic worship unfolded unevenly across regions. Still, Palestrina's style came to stand for something real: controlled clarity, vocal balance, and an ability to write richly woven polyphony in which the sacred text can remain clear within the texture. If medieval polyphony can feel like stonework, Renaissance polyphony often feels like light through glass, structured, intricate, and surprisingly transparent. And sacred music is only part of the story. The Renaissance is also an age of courts, and courtly life creates a growing demand for music suited not only to chapels, but to private rooms and cultivated gatherings. Secular song flourishes. In Italy, the madrigal becomes a laboratory for expression. Composers set poems about love, longing, jealousy, and delight, and begin pushing musical gesture closer to emotional speech. A rising line can follow the image of ascent, harmony can darken around the thought of death, rhythm can tighten as desire grows more urgent. It is not opera yet, but it already carries a hint of theatre. Instruments, too, step more confidently into view. Medieval Europe had instruments, of course, but much of the most prestigious written music was vocal. During the Renaissance, instrumental music begins to claim a more distinct place of its own. Lutes and viols appear in refined settings, consorts perform dances and arrangements of vocal pieces. Composers write for keyboard instruments with growing ambition, music expands beyond the chapel choir into domestic and courtly life, and listeners begin to hear purely instrumental beauty as something worth pursuing in its own right. Then, toward the end of the 16th century, certain cities begin to sound like the future. In Venice, at St. Mark's Basilica, architecture invites spectacle. Choirs and instrumental groups can be placed in different galleries, answering one another across space. Composers write music that turns this setting into drama, voices and instruments calling across the church, bright sonorities flashing against one another, contrast becoming part of the design. That appetite for contrast, between loud and soft, sparse and full, solo and ensemble, signals a shift in musical imagination. Renaissance balance begins to lean towards something more immediate, more rhetorical, more openly expressive. And as the century draws to a close, a new ambition rises in Italy to make music speak as directly as the human voice itself. In Florence, a circle of intellectuals and musicians looks back toward ancient Greek drama, partly through scholarship, partly through imaginative reconstruction, and begins to experiment with ways of setting text so that it can be understood almost as speech, while still lifted by melody. The result will be a new genre with enormous consequences: opera. By the time Claudio Monteverdi brings this emerging style to full artistic power in the early 17th century, the groundwork has already been laid. Text has gained new importance, expressive gesture has been cultivated, instrumental color has grown more sophisticated, and the desire to move an audience has become bolder. Grief, tenderness, fury, seduction, these become musical events. The voice begins to move between speech-like delivery and soaring melody. Instruments are no longer just background color. They become agents of mood and drama. The Renaissance does not end with a sudden break. It gives way, gradually, to a new world of sound, one drawn to drama, contrast, and the theatre of feeling. The next age is already taking shape. In the next episode, we'll follow that change into the Baroque and the Classical Age, a fascinating journey through figures such as Johann Sebastian Bach, Georg Friedrich Handel, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, and Ludwig van Beethoven. Before I leave you, thank you for spending this time with me. If you enjoyed the episode, you can help these stories travel by leaving a comment, liking the video, sharing it with someone who would enjoy it, or subscribing to the channel. It makes a genuine difference. That's it from me today. I hope you have a good day, and I'll see you again in the next episode.